Hello everybody, we are back with a new episode of The Process. It's been a little bit, but I'm back to be here. I'm glad to be back here, I should say. And today we're going over a couple of things regarding layout and mood, particularly for taking one of our magic card thumbnails, and you could see the previous video for that. And we're taking one of the thumbnails to a final illustration. And we're going to be taking number 4, the bottom right thumbnail, to be our first initial final pass. So I'm just using the initial thumbnail over here to give myself a little bit of the base, just the file that I'll be working on from this point forward to create the final. The thumbnail was already created and it gave a lot of initial direction of composition, color tone, lighting, layout, design. And so today, as we go into the final, we're not going to be pushing the idea any further. More so, we're going to be trying to finalize the image. And as a concept designer, that's a very important thing, because we don't just start, but we also have to finish the designs so that we can submit them. So I'm going to be starting off with just layout. Now, layout to me means that I'm going to be placing the important objects in proper space, in proper distance, in proper scale. Now, layout is where I focus on where do things belong. And I don't want to worry about anything else until the layout portion is at a good spot. So initially I started off with the water, it's kind of like the ground plane. And in the thumbnail you'll see a large mountain sort of in the shallow background. That's what I'm working on here, and I like to work on piece by piece, element by element, because it allows me to focus on that particular area of design. Now, for example, for this big mountain back here, I'm trying to make sure, number one, it's in the right place. And I'm using the lasso tool to kind of cut out the photo that I put in there. You can see what I'm doing right here. Boom. And now I have the silhouette, and I want to make sure the texture is doing a couple of things. Because with layout, I don't just want to make sure it's in the right place, but it's also representing the right amount of scale. So rocks, plants, even these darker accents that you see of shadows and I don't know, like details on the mountain, those are all recognizable scale elements, right? So I want to be very mindful of that. Now I'm going to be working on the background mountain layer back there, and it's a really simple layer. It's just mostly just a silhouette. But I'm using the selection from the photo. I want to make sure that the photo has some of the details showing through so that I'm getting the right read and the right look. All right, now that we have mountains. Now that we have the mountain settled in, I'm going to be working on a few more of the elements just to make sure everything is working properly. So for example, some of the foreground elements of just the rocks in the foreground, and I'm using the same mountain texture, more or less on the logic of it's the same type of rock that just maybe fell down from the mountain and landed in the water or something like that. But I'm using the same texture just to communicate the rock. So as of right now, it's a little bit messy because we haven't really formatted the values or the lighting or the color. We're just using photos to initially lay out the composition and also to lay out the basic composition, shapes, and materials here. All right, let's work on the sky. So as I'm working in the background, I'm just going to make sure that I have the thumbnail visible. I have to remember that the thumbnail is almost like my directional GPS coordinates. I'm supposed to be going in that direction. And if I veer too far off, then the finished image won't be close enough to the thumbnail. And that's a problem because in concept design, we usually submit some rough or a thumbnail to show an art director the direction of where we're trying to go. And oftentimes this loose sketch that you see on the upper left, it has enough information in there for an art director to see the direction, the tone, the feel, even the design. It's just void of details. And this is super important because a lot of art directors don't want the surprise at the end. They would love to see the process of it so they can do their job. They can direct and help push the development of the art, so the art direction. So I think it's important that whenever we do paintings and designs, that the final has a resemblance, a very, very strong resemblance to the initial thumbnail. Now the thumbnail is loose, it's quick, it's supposed to have a lot of indication in there. So obviously the final will change a little bit from the original, but it still needs to stay pretty consistent. And that's a challenge. So I like to use my personal work, like stuff like this, in order to help practice that discipline. Oftentimes I find myself changing composition, changing the design, whenever I run into a sort of like a roadblock, or like I run into a problem. And I always thought that was a pretty good way to solve around that problem, but I also was told that it also doesn't allow myself to really try and solve the problem before I change it to a different idea or a different design. So I actually created like a little bit of a crutch, which was not the best thing to do. All right, let's jump back into the image. So let's take some waterfall from our photo asset research file. Now that the file that has all the photos that I'm using in here, those were all pre-selected, and I did a good amount of research to understand what are the major materials that I have in my painting here. So other than water, rocks, and waterfalls, there are going to be elements of these ancient runes, these swan, crane, bird elements, and stuff like that. So my photo reference file has all of the materials, right? Just like if we were, pulling out tools from a toolbox or ingredients from a refrigerator, we want to get them all ready. So while looking at my thumbnail, I'm trying to use these photos to arrange the waterfall so it has, again, a strong resemblance, right, of the big, medium, and small. I like to design in big, medium, and small. It tends to be like a second language for me now. After so many years of doing it, it became very natural. But I remember in the beginning, I had to consciously pay attention to where's my big, where's my medium, where's my small. And I would have to force myself to do it. But again, after a few years, and after being very mindful about it, it kind of comes second nature now. So it's nice to know that it doesn't always take the same amount of effort, and fluidity, efficiency kind of comes along the way later on. All right, so the waterfall's looking better, right? I'm trying to get it set in the proper value structure a little bit. As I'm developing the image, I'm constantly fighting between the photo and the value and color. Okay, so I'm just trying to work them in between and have them have a balance, have a balance. And I'm using my thumbnail as sort of the ultimate direction of how I'm supposed to make these decisions. Because if I was trying to do this without a thumbnail, it would be super challenging. There's too many things to balance all at once. Just like a waiter has a tray of food, it can only carry so much food, and you only want to be able to balance certain things, So that's what I'm doing here. I just want to work on the waterfall, all right? My mentality is, once we get used to a working process and we have a pretty good understanding about digital painting, the basics of color, the basics of composition, what ends up happening is this becomes like this dance of doing it all at the same time. But it's challenging to do it all at the same time, isn't it? So what I like to do is I like to at least focus on a portion at a time. So if you notice that when I started, I did the water, then worked on the mountain, then worked on the sky. And in each step, I don't want to go too fast. I want to make sure each element is sort of done right, done correctly, and I don't have to go back and readjust. Now the focal point of this image is definitely the rooms, that area of the area of the composition that has the most amount of interesting shapes and interesting details. So as we're working through this image, the waterfall is slowly start to get in place. I'm working on the values just a little bit to make sure that I'm getting the right read. And I just want to be sure that I'm not, by the time I start getting to the runes, which is going to take a bulk of time, right? Because that is the real focal point of this image. What I'm basically doing right now is just creating a really nice background, So I just want to make sure that I have the proper elements in the visible, and that there's a good backdrop for these shapes, these rooms, to be visible. All right. So I'm just doing a really quick copy paste lasso tool cutout. Now we see the rooms, and it's important to kind of see this here because the background is not just a location and a design, but it's also a way to create a wonderful backdrop so that the focal point, the POI, the point of interest, becomes more visible. It becomes more staged, right? And there's a lot of design theories that we can use here, but one design theory that I love to use is the design theory of contrast. Simple versus complex, right? So I'm trying to use a simple backdrop of atmosphere from the waterfall to create a little bit of a simple background that where the runes sit in front of it, now the runes can have all the detail, okay? Because anytime there's detail on top of detail, it becomes a little bit challenging to see the information. Our eye has to work extra hard to kind of see it. If you think about detail on detail, that's just like a soldier wearing camouflage uniform in the jungle. That's like detail or noise on top of other noise. So I want to make sure that we're doing this with balance. Alrighty, so we're moving forward. You could see initially I had the texture on here, and maybe some of you are wondering, well, what is that for? How are you going to use that? But now you see. In this image, there's only one object with a lot of perspective, and that's the triangular rune that I'm kind of finessing right now. That's one of the only elements. If you look at all the other elements, foreground, middleground, background, the waterfall, the mountain, most of them are done in a pretty flat, side view manner. It's very, very profile view. But now we have this one rune, the one that's taken a lot of attention. There's a lot of perspective in it. And I want to make sure, because the eye is going to spend time looking at that rune, I want to make sure that I'm doing it correctly. Okay? So I'm taking the proper steps to align the perspective, make sure the details work. Lighting this thing is going to be pretty challenging because the surfaces are all facing different directions. And that's going to matter on how we build up lighting, shadows, reflected light, focal areas, and stuff like that. So I've initially just textured it. I have this wonderful texture that I made prior to doing this painting, and it's something that it gives me sort of a wallpaper of stone carvings so that I can put it into the piece. All right, so just double checking the perspective, adding a little bit of color, I believe on a soft light layer. And once the color starts to adjust, it looks a lot better, right? It starts to become a lot more readable. It doesn't look like some bad photo compositing. But color really, really helps in that sense. Alrighty. Now, more elements to go. It's going to shortcut, take a piece of that, move it over here, and attach it, clip it into the layer. Okay. Oftentimes, I try to find the reasonable shortcuts, and I mean that in a way that I mean to say reasonable shortcuts because there has to be a reason and a sort of result that you're looking for. Like, not all shortcuts help, and not all quick Photoshop kind of shortcuts sometimes add to the value of your piece, and sometimes it doesn't, you know. And I think over time, doing these types of paintings, it allows you to know, all right, this is how I can use these like really simple copy and paste techniques, you know, duping things over, duplicating things over to use the same asset. Our eyes is a pretty good eye. We can spot patterns, right? We can spot patterns pretty easily. And I think that's what's important, right? Is like if we see repetition or recognizable copy and pasting in a piece of concept art or an illustration, it kind of like pulls us out of the piece, right? It gives us a distraction. And so if there are those types of distractions, then we're not immersed. We're not immersed into the image, and we're not immersed into the world that we're creating, right? And I think that's dangerous, especially for a concept artist where we're trying to almost make like these believable worlds that people can just look at and think it's truth, right? They can see it, right? So I just think that that's important. Consistency. Making sure things are consistent and making sure that there's no element in there that really pulls the viewer out of the world that you're creating. You know, so that's why I think for concept art, technique is very important. But technique, up until a certain point, when there's a level of good communication and good process, then we don't have to get more rendering. You know, we don't have to push too much more software and megabytes of detail and things like that. It becomes about just immersion into the piece, getting these subtleties, getting the nuances of design in there. And I was at a recent conference in Paris, and Shadi Safadi, if you guys know who he is from One Pixel Brush, he's talking a lot about his process and his new animated short called Christo. But he was talking about how nowadays designers, we need to bring in like the nuances. We need to bring in the subtleties that we notice from life experience. You know, digital tools are going to be there, and they're there right now, but we are the ones to bring in the nuance of life. The things that, you know, unless you've smelled fresh bread, you don't know what it's like to smell fresh bread, right? So it's kind of like that, bringing that sensibility into your art. All right, well, back to the image, you know, just kind of talking about this. The image is a lot of fun to develop here. And you see the thumbnail, right? It's a very basic composition. There's not a whole lot of super high concept design, you know, reinventing here, but it's basic. It's this idea of a serene, kind of calm wilderness waterfall in a very warm sunsetting moment, and it's very natural to just have these huge, fantastic runes just chilling at the base of this waterfall, like it was there for 100 years, 200 years. It's just part of this world. And that's my design. You know, that's the very simple kind of story that we're going for. And so as we're working on this, now I'm getting to the other elements that you see in here. Some of it is a little bit narrative, such as, you know, adding in some birds, and, you know, it adds to the storytelling. Even though there's not a character talking to somebody, like that kind of narrative, we understand the sensibilities of the world, and our brain starts to actually fill in a little bit of narrative, which is kind of nice. Okay, so I got most of the really big elements in here. All right, when I'm looking at the small thumbnail, from the background to the foreground to the small elements of lily pads, birds, rocks, all the elements are in place. So what I'd like to kind of start working on now is finessing the illustration. Okay, photo bashing is a really good technique, and you can get a lot of immediate result, and it looks really good. However, what if it's not completely matching the design of your thumbnail? Then that's a problem, right? Because we don't want it to look too different. So right now I'm at a stage where I'm editing. I'm not adding more parts to it, but I'm going to be editing the information that we're seeing in the painting now so it better matches the thumbnail. You know, working as an art director myself, one of the things that is challenging is keeping the consistency of the thumbnail through the entire piece, right? And for any of you who kind of know what I mean, you definitely know what I mean, right? Sometimes the thumbnail, it's like, yes, I'm gonna go in this direction, and then all of a sudden at the end, it's like a completely different piece, right? Which, yes, it does happen, and yes, that is the journey of an artist. However, we can see how that can kind of be problematic if we're doing that for the job, right? So there's like this delicate balance in between that's very important. So here's an idea of contrast. We see the bird, we see the crane's head, and I want that shape to be very, very pronounced. So the idea is to create a more simplified backdrop behind it so it really promotes, really pushes the silhouette forward. So I thought that was a good call. Let's go back to some of the references over here. So you see this entire reference sheet. It's nothing too crazy, very, very basic in terms of its elements. But now I'm going to start getting some more, it's like now I need to go to the refrigerator and open up the drawer to find more specific ingredients that I might be looking for. All right, here we go. Let's see what we got. So I have some more rocks, a different kind of a file that I like to use. Okay, so here we go. All right. So just a little bit of file cleanup, and I'm going to work on some values. Okay, now that most of the parts are in, I'm going to be shifting from layout to working on mood. All right, now mood for me, I'm kind of for mood, mood for me is a combination of color, lighting, values, and where the eye is supposed to go. Okay, so it has nothing, I'm completely shifting away from the ideas of layout. Where do things belong? Layout also is, how do they fit in compositionally, space and depth? How is the overall layout? That's the focus. Now I'm switching over to mood, all right, the second big word of this whole process. Now mood is about controlling the different parts, the lighting, atmosphere, shadows, contrast, color. Now contrast is going to be sort of the very, very key word here, because even with these little darker accents that I'm putting under the lily pad, create a little bit of contrast that is not just believable in terms of light and shadow, but it brings in an extra level of value that the eye can latch onto. Okay, and so while doing this, I'm also thinking about materials, right? Because lighting an object in space has a lot to do with materials as well. Certain materials absorb light, they swallow light. Imagine a matte black or like a wool jacket, black jacket in the daytime. It just absorbs all this light. And then you have other objects like gold or shiny silver that just bounce light, right? There's completely different amounts of reflected light and bounce light that are happening in those objects because of the materials. So it's nice to have photo reference that I can look at that allows me to see some of the nuances that I'm trying to pick up, like the little flower, the lotus flower on the lily pad, the little shadows that are on the bottom edge of it when it's touching the surface of the water. These are the nuances that are very, very key because, and this is something that I tell a lot of students in my classes, as a concept artist, we are trying to be professional liars, right? This image that you're looking at is a complete fabrication. It is a lie, right? But I'm trying to make everybody believe that it's real, and we're trying to utilize all of these believable elements from life, and we're putting it in this painting so So it's fooling you, hopefully, you know? Moving forward, let's work on a little bit of paint down. So when it comes to light and the whole mood application, knowing the volume and the direction of where your surfaces are going, that's super crucial. Why? Because light hits surfaces, right? And if we don't know the dimension of even the foreground rock, I know it's an organic shape, but it still belongs inside of a primitive form, like a cube or a pyramid or a sphere. Then we know how to light it. And that's one of the important things. Lighting becomes one of the things that if we do it in a uniform way with all the objects, then it really fools the eye. It really makes it believable. Okay, now let's keep it going. Painting on this foreground rock a little bit. Let's do a little bit of lighting and form. Again, this is all about form. It's all about light. It's all about what are the shapes and how can we make sure it looks like it's in the space. So I'm just going to add a little bit of details on to the bird here. I'm using a little bit of a different brush. It's not so hard-edged painterly, but it does have a lot of texture in it, which I like, because when I paint with a textury brush on top of photo, the pixels work well together, you know, and I'm just a fan of how that looks. I also like the bird's head right now, how it's really being promoted by the waterfall, the softness of the misty waterfall behind it. I just kind of like that. I like edge variation, you know, like hard edge and soft edge next to each other. I just feel like that looks really, really cool. So behind the big rune, I'm trying to make sure that there are areas of super, super soft edges. Now I was looking at the crane and I was like, man, this is a really cool design. I wonder if there's a way to just make it my own, you know, enhance it ever so slightly so it's maybe unique to this world, you know, or unique to this specific country or geographic location, you know, giving it a little bit further design, a little bit of lighting. So at this phase, what's really nice is I don't have to worry about scale. You know, my eye is still trying to look for scale errors, but because we were doing that in the layout phase and we could completely focus just on that element, layout, size, perspective, scale, placement, I feel very, very, it feels nice that I don't have to like go back, you know, and do that. So this process that I like to use, it's definitely a, you know, it's like a recipe in a sense where every step that you do just keeps adding to getting to the final result. All right, let's put some time and focus onto this major POI, the point of interest. So I feel like I've been kind of painting around everything, you know? I feel like I've been painting the bird and the waterfall and like the mountains up top and the rocks down below, and I've just left this rune to sort of be, oh man, on its own, okay? But now we got to pay attention to it, okay? This is an area that I want to make sure that I paint it well and that the light and the forms are making sense. Why? Because we know it's the focal point. You could see it in the composition, you could see the way it's composed and lit and where there's contrast. And so with any image, and just even looking at old traditional painters, they would always spend more time delineating more detail and clarity in the area of most interest. That's always the way it's been, right? And so I want to make sure that, you know, I'm embodying at least that mentality as well. All right, so I'm going to work on the lit side first. Actually, the side that's just facing upward, kind of facing the camera. I'm going to work on that side first. And initially, there's a lot of there's kind of some pixelation in there. You know, the initial texture, it's good, but it's not the best. And you know, along the way, I'm going to have to sort of clean it up inside of the painting. So it's a little bit of a challenge right now. I'm just trying to work on, okay, let's just get this major shape to read. It's like a, I don't know the actual name of the shape, but you know, it's it's like a double pyramid, you know, top and bottom. So it's like a diamond pyramid. You're gonna have to help me out with the name. I'm sure I'm sure someone knows it. So at this point, just kind of working back and forth, you know, a little bit on the one in the front, a little bit on the one in the back. Okay, and because there's a lot of detail in there, and in the thumbnail, it's a pretty, if you look at it, it's not like there's a whole lot of brush strokes in there. It's still pretty simplified. I want to make sure the shape, the outer silhouette, is being read first and not the internal detail, hopefully. So I just want to make sure that we're working on that. Now, contrast is very important because initially, you know, right by the bird's head right there and the sort of complex meeting point of the pyramid, of the rune and the water, there's a lot of bright contrast behind it. Now my eye starts to go there because of the contrast, but that's not really the point in where I want the eye to start off the journey. So what's important is, while doing lighting, is I need to make sure I'm putting in all of the different values, because once there's a bright spot behind that rune, then there's contrast, especially because the rune is dark. So I want to make sure I'm laying in a majority of the values, light and dark, so I can start gauging how much atmosphere needs to be there to push this shape back. I hope that's making sense, but we'll kind of see it in practice right here. So let's add in some more details. You know, I want to get that water line to be really evident. Really, really visible. We'll love that shape, you know, to see the water and then the rune sticking out of it. It's like a really strong read. So hopefully that. Now a little bit of details here and there. I think sometimes what I do, to be honest, is while I'm thinking, I just go to another area. So if I'm thinking about the runes, for example, and how to tackle it, sometimes I just start working on another part of the painting, you know, while my brain is trying to absorb what is going on, you know. So you can kind of see over here, I'm just like showing, I just want to show you guys this more simplified layout file where it's going to look pretty bad. It's just a lot of noisy, detailed photo with lighting that's all over the place, all in different places. The color is all over the place. So that's what this file is, just to show you kind of the raw photo layout. Then we get into a little bit of tone, and then lastly on this new file, the newest version I have now, we're really going in and painting down some of the lighting, painting up some of the contrast. So we're really controlling it here. Layout was the first step. Mood is the second step. All right, creating the ideas of contrast, lighting, light direction. You know, what areas of saturation could there be? Using a curve to sort of light this water surface a little bit. I mean, I like the way that looks. However, it's a bit strong, you know. There's the thumbnail. Now that I look back and I'm kind of like examining the thumbnail, that's a bit too bright. So I'm going to tone that down. See, so I'm gauging. Everything has to kind of gauge back to the thumbnail. All right. So as we go here, let's start really jumping into some of the rune. I would love to think about the rune and how the light is going to affect it. You know, which edge is lit by the sky, which edge or surface of the rune is like going to get the reflected bounce light from the water. And that's what my brain is kind of thinking about right now. I thought I had it slightly indicated in the thumbnail, so I'm going to go with that direction first. And let's see how that goes, okay? And again, this is me working in another part of the composition that's not as crucial, but it allows me to buy some valuable thinking time. You know, the waterfalls that we did earlier that are right behind the rune, that was for us to kind of understand the techniques of how to do it. I know what layer setting to use. I know how to paint it in. I'll also know what techniques to use to bring out the color properly. So this pass of the waterfall is probably going to go by much faster, right? Because for each painting, sometimes we're like just figuring out not just what the design is, but we're figuring out like how to actually create it. You know, the steps of construction, the steps of making it, right? Sometimes there's like two different conversations that we have in our head. What do we make and how do we make it? All right. I feel like the sky could use a little dimension. And so I want to put in a little bit of values back there just to show some sky tone and sky elements, right? So it's not just so flat. So here we go. Just kind of painting that in using a little bit of photo. I believe on screen layer, just to be able to get some of the contrast visible. There we go. I don't like the placement of that. It's like tangenting like crazy in the corner where the mountain and the rune all meet together. So I want to find I like the idea and I like that there's contrast, but I just think it's in the wrong place. So that's a little bit better. And keeping it soft, you know. One thing about digital painting that I realized is that the contrast between a hard edge and a soft edge can really make the painting look really, really beautiful. And for everyone who's watching, if you don't know the artist named Jamie Jones or Craig Mullins, look them up. They are both like these amazing concept artists that are also really, really traditionally strong at painting. And they got some wonderful painting style. I love it. So look them up if you don't know them yet. All right, let's go. Let's keep this going. I'm sort of saving the rune as the last part. It's one of those things where it's like drawing in the details of the face last, you know. I like to work around the image, sometimes giving myself a little confidence as I paint all the elements, and then I'll come and do the main focal point. This is not going to be the most fun dynamic painting process here because there's a lot of perspective and there's a lot of right angles. There's a lot of or careful angles that we need to make sure that look right to show the form properly. So what better way to do that than use some good old lasso tool, polygonal lasso tool. And my method, my approach right now is just to paint it in where we see the bigger rhythms, we see the larger rhythms first. Simple is faster to read than complex. So our eye usually looks for simple areas first to understand what the heck we're looking at. And that's what I want to do here. So you can see I'm trying to really pay attention to what edges need to get pushed back and be lit by a certain area that's more bounce light from the water. So I just want, and this side is kind of starting to face away from the light, but there is water underneath it too, so there's going to be a bounce on that. So it's a little bit of a challenge here. You know, we're not just dealing with a cube with a 1, 2, 3, 4, you know, like whatever surfaces that are optically visible, but here we have more edges, more surfaces, and they're kind of at an angle. So it's going to be a little bit of a, gosh, it reminds me of early art school. We're just like painting cubes and space and stuff, you know, painting cubes and spheres. I'm glad I kind of paid attention during that class, because that's all this is right here. This is painting forms to receive light and bounce light. Just paying attention to the light. So we have certain objects that are kind of flat, you know, there's not a lot of dimension, but then we also have certain objects that are being pushed back in space by quite a distance. And so the back edge of that rune is a lot further away than the point that's lit on the rune, you know. And we also have an edge facing almost straight down, which is facing the water. So I just want to make sure that I'm paying attention to surfaces and the subtle value shifts that are happening with these surfaces to make the form changed like 90 degrees in space, it's all going to be done kind of with these like little bit of subtleties in the value shifts, you know? Because we have to remember there's not like a big spotlight hitting this thing or a big ray of sunlight just like hitting a very strong edge. This is very kind of a subdued and a little bit more on the kind of more somber lighting side, right? Nothing too dynamic, right? It's a little bit softer. So now, just within the area of noise, areas of details here, I just want to paint in some indication, you know? Get a little bit more like it feels hand painted a bit. I was never a fan of when a painting looks too photoshoppy or too detailed with photos. I like when there's sort of a optical balance of painterly and photo detail. I don't know if you all like kind of feel that way as well. This is a personal style preference of mine, I think, but that's what I like, and that's what I tend to do within my paintings, you know. And I think that's a personal flavor, you know, because of the artists like Jamie Jones and Craig Mullins, and I could list actually a ton of artists that I learn from in that sensibility of like that personal aspect, you know. So I think that's really, really awesome. All right, just more rendering. I feel like I'm getting closer, and I'm doing part by part, just making sure, again, paying attention to the details. And the lasso tool, oh my goodness, what a lifesaver this is, right? Like to be able to hit those hard edges, to be able to hit those 90-degree changes in perspective at a tilt. It's not the most fun thing to do freehand, so yes, let's do it. If there was other ideas of, oh, maybe you could use 3D, absolutely, but you still have to do this part too, you know, because we have to control the lighting, right? And no matter how much rendering I do in 3D and bringing it into the painting, I still find myself having to light it more specifically to the environment, you know. And so for me, that's a challenge, and sometimes it's like, well, why did I need to spend the time to do it in 3D when I know I'm going to do it here? So there's like just like a difference of mindsets, you know. I have friends who are super 3D proficient, and they could probably do this in 3D with the same effectiveness. I'm just not that proficient at the tool, so I just have to use whatever is more available to me, right? One thing about concept design is it's rarely controlled by what software you use. It's more of a, you know, deliver the idea, deliver the concept, like let's get production going. So I never really had like an art director or a movie director say, hey James, that's a great idea, but can you go back and do it in this software? You know, it's like I've never had that request, you know. Unless ahead of time it's like, hey, we need a Photoshop layer for cinematics. Then there's like a specific request, you know, ahead of time. Right, look at that. It's starting to read. It looks like there's more dimension and form. And I'm doing a lot on the light side. I'm also pushing some atmosphere and distance, because the top point of that rune, if we think about how far away it is from, you know, where we are as a camera, that's a big sense of space. So dark, medium, light. Let's make sure the things getting pushed back in space are a little bit lighter. And just kind of creating a little bit, going back and forth, you know. As much as I would like to say that we painted the waterfall and did the right amount of contrast and loose edge, we don't know how it looks until we actually start touching the actual POI and then looking at it together, right? So it's always about do as far as you can, you know, look at your thumbnail to see the direction, but always know that there's going to be a little bit of adjustment all the time, right? Because this is like nuances and subtleties demand like a careful application, It's not something that you can just like boom, boom, boom and be super brushstrokey, because it's about finesse. Also, what's very important is you're getting a really good look at how large I like to paint. The painting on my screen, I would say, is roughly about 10 inches wide at most. You know, right now with the size of the painting, it's more or less about 8 inches wide. And I like to paint where I'm seeing all of it. I'll zoom in to apply detail, but when I'm looking at it and trying to examine, I want to make sure that it's something that's like easy to see, you know, not too much, not like zoomed in where I'm just looking at details. I want to look at bigger decision making. So as we're pushing forward, we're getting pretty close. You know, little by little, the image itself is getting resolved. And what I really like about the process of focusing on layout and then mood is that each part of the cooking process is very clearly defined, right? Like, I remember as a junior concept artist, there were times where my paintings would work well, and there were times where I would super struggle with even the most basic paintings sometimes, and I couldn't figure out why. And I realized later, talking to friends and talking with art directors and instructors, that there was a process difference. There was a difference in how I actually made the image and started and prepped the material and all that kind of stuff. And the images that were more struggling, I would bounce back and forth between layout and lighting and layout and mood, and nothing would be able to be settled, because sometimes in a painting we just need to lock certain big elements in, and then we build on top of that, then we build on top of that, right? So if the main base is always shifting and changing, then nothing has the ability to actually solidify and cement, you know? And that's why I love this process. For now, it's a two-step process of just layout and mood, but usually I have a third one where we talk about narrative or story at the very end. But for now, layout and mood, just kind of focusing on those two steps at a time. Focusing on those two steps, but one at a time, right? Where we get to fully immerse our focus and concentration to solve one problem at a time. That's what I love about this process. And the more I use this process, the more I remember to use this process, the smoother and more consistent my concept art becomes. Right? It becomes more consistent. And that's really good, because now that I'm in the art director position and I work with other artists, consistency, you know, with the team that I work with, it's like the most desirable thing, right? Consistency. You know, can you do one good painting? Yes, we can all probably do one really good painting, right? If we've had the time and the effort to it. But can we deliver these on a more regular basis? And does that mean that you know your process of how to do it? So if you ever feel like you're, you know, in that zone where like sometimes it's a hit, sometimes it's a miss, well, I would encourage you to examine how you are, what kind of process you're creating for this, you know? And process doesn't need to be complex. In fact, most process for the things in this world that we enjoy are actually quite simple. But simple doesn't mean easy. Simple usually means that it's takes a lot of practice, right? So, but that's what I would say. We're here to practice, we're here to learn, and hopefully during today's, you know, in this video today, hopefully be able to learn or adapt a process that's just a little bit more simplified. Our images tend to get complex. Our images tend to get very informative, and there's no better way to control complexity than using simplicity, you know. As I'm going through this painting here, 90% of the painting is now locked in. I am now just going to be applying little touch-ups, things that will maybe enhance the painting by just a few percent. Nothing major, because all the stuff that we did is already laid in. You know, focusing on the bird a little bit, adding some different designs. I thought something like this might look kind of cool, but I think not. I might just delete it. All right, see ya. All right, now, this is where I like to take a short break. I've taken the piece as far as I can, as far as possible, you know, with the information that's visible from the thumbnail, right? And, you know, I keep thinking to myself, I need to add in more information. And you could see me doing that right now. But I'm diverting away from the thumbnail again. It's actually really funny. So every once in a while, I need to remind myself, like, hey, James, what are you adding? Look at the thumbnail again. You know, just look at it one more time and make sure that the things that we're adding are adding value to it, and we're not just adding things to just for the sake of complexity or whatnot, you know? I find myself doing that a lot, and it's really funny that happens, you know? We just want to keep adding sometimes. That's one thing I think is very important that I've learned over the course of time working in the industry is sticking to the brief, you know, sticking to the direction. Much like using GPS in a car, like if you don't follow directions, you're not going to get to your desired location, and it could probably lead to a little bit of frustration, right? So let's not do that, you know? Anyhow, yeah, some water details, water reflections. And notice that I didn't paint on the water too much this whole time. And I was kind of done on purpose because I don't want to build up detail on the water. I actually want it to be a little bit more of the calm, simple area of the composition, like the water and the sky. Like all the rocks have details, all the ruins have details, even the waterfall has a lot of suggested information. So I just want to get some areas of rest. You know, not all of it has to be super complex. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. You can see the thumbnail all on this page, right? You can see the thumbnail, the layout phase, which is the top, and then we're also having a lighting phase where we're talking about the mood, all right? And so from here, we've painted in as almost as much as we can, and we're getting very, very close to the finish line. But at this point, after I take a short break and I allow my eye to take a short rest, you know, you ever do a painting or a drawing, you take a break, you go to the restroom, you come back, and you're like, you see it, and you're like, whoa, I see some mistakes. You know, like you can notice things, right? Not when you were doing it, but once you took a step back, right? And I think for me, that's key. That's so important, to take a step back, right? Take a step back. Let's add in some more birds. Got some more elements to do here. But as I'm doing some of these last, you know, little bits of information that were still in the thumbnail, just want to make sure I'm getting all that in there, is I'm gonna take that time, take a break, and allow myself to do self-art direction. I'm gonna give myself some notes. These last touch-up notes that will allow me to sort of bring in the last icing element on the cake. Right, just the last bits, you know. So after I get these birds laid in, notice that I'm also working on a flattened version of this entire thing. We're getting done. We're getting completed. I don't need all the layers. In fact, if I'm still in the mindset of, man, I need the cloud layer in the background to be layered because I might move the cloud, then we're not. We need to be able to practice how to lay something in, see if it looks good, and then make that decision that it's going to stay, you know, instead of always having to. And by the way, I also have these other files, you know, that I've saved, stage 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, perhaps, that if I wanted to go back to that layer, I could, right? So there's still a bit of that. Added in some birds, a little bit of tone of color, kind of washed it down with a I believe an overlay of just color. And I'm gonna get a little bit more softness to the waterfall, maybe do a little of smudging of the edges, just to be able to get that idea of the waterfall kind of in motion, you know, getting that blurred edge. Just a little bit of pop down there, accentuating that edge just a little bit more, that surface. Right, so far so good. 1, 2, before and after. You see the photo references down below. That photo reference pack, that file that we used all the photos from, doesn't even have a lot of photos, right? We don't need 90 tomatoes, different types of tomatoes, right? We don't need like 8 different mountains. In fact, I just used one and a portion of that over and over and over. All right, now with a little bit of a fresh eye, I'm coming around here and just noting, making notes, putting down green line marks of just, I want some cloud shapes here. I want to show more contrast on the rune. Still a little bit of blurred edges on the waterfall, some more details here and there. Maybe some lighting on the crane in the foreground. Some details, not like that. Okay, we get to think things through just a little bit. These are my notes. These are the last notes at the very end. And so, let's go through them one by one. Okay? So I had a little bit of notes of details on this bird. Yep, just like that. Turn that on and off. And I really like to do this phase. And it was recommended by a friend of mine who's an awesome concept artist named Joel Chang. We went to Art Center together. But he would talk about this last phase and you know, these little touch-ups that you would kind of do. You're almost like switching your hat from almost trying to be like your own instructor, you know, like giving yourself your own crit. And I thought this phase was really good because it not only allows you to take a break from the piece, but it allows you to kind of examine your work. Be someone who can almost self-art direct. And that was kind of the early steps, I think, to that type of mentality, is really looking at your artwork and starting to see what are some of the feedbacks that you've gotten that you can actually implement into this piece, some of the design properties or finishing ideologies that you've heard before that kind of come to mind when you're looking at this piece. Those are the things that I try to put down and involve and put into the piece. Wanted to show more scale, so I'm just duplicating more texture of the rune inside of these smaller gaps that are visible on the bigger design. So I just want to make it feel more kind of massive, you know, having more scale, and just repeating that. I feel like it's doing a good job so far. So keep on there. And again, these are just all notes that are from the green line notes. A little bit of details. And so with the green line notes, I think it's important because it's also like a little bit of a personality, you know? It's just the finishing touches that sometimes only you can see and only you pay attention to. You know, I think that's a really important topic. And when I was at the conference, the IAMAG conference in Paris, you know, that's what a lot of presenters talked about. With today's day and age of technology, it's what is the voice of an artist? And these become the things that we pay attention to and the things that matter to us. So how do we develop that muscle? Is when you're outside, and this is what I like to do. When you're outside, just be very aware of what your eye looks at and where it tends to slow down. You know, whenever I'm walking or hiking or in an area that I'm there for the very first time, it's a really good exercise to observe, because our eye tends to scan over a lot of information and then it slows down on certain bits of detail. And those certain bits of detail are things that subconsciously your eye and your brain and your body are like, what's that? That's kind of nice. Let me look at that for a little bit longer, you know? And guess what? That's what we're doing inside of our paintings. We're doing the exact same replication of scanning over an image and then looking at these little parts of detail. Because I know for a fact in this painting, there's areas of the painting where we just glance over it very quickly. And then there's other areas where we slow down and we look at it with more intention. We look at it with more, sometimes we even lean in to look at some of that detail, right? So that's what's the important part about doing that for our paintings, is giving it that extra little bit of interest and almost like control, right? You're kind of controlling what the viewers look at. And that's I think is something that is human, it is important, and it's what's going to give your art and design an extra voice. So please, I don't know, try paying attention to that next time when you're out and about, and maybe in an area that you're not too familiar with. All right, there's my notes. All right, got a little bit here, a little bit there. I think I've addressed majority of it. All right, I think I need to get just a couple more little details in here, and you can kind of see how quickly I like to work in some of the information here. This is not a matte painting where you're going to zoom in like 300% and look at the pixels, right? This is a conceptual development piece that can be world building. It could be meant for and this was like on the magic card side of illustration, but that was a topic that we used, and this is the same techniques that I would use for film, for video games, whatever the project is. I tend to use the same tools and the same process, regardless of some of the direction that it goes into. Obviously, there's a little bit of nuances to that. I can talk about that in a later video, but for now, this is what we got. And for the maybe, I don't know, I think I've done up until now maybe like 80, I think, like magic cards. I don't even know the number, but this is kind of the process that I like to use to get it to feel painted, to get it to also feel very detailed, and do it in a way that's constructive. There's a good process to rely on, and it doesn't take too much time. So, thank you for joining. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed another episode of The Process. If you like this, please give me a like, subscribe to the channel, and please let me know in the comments what you liked and maybe what you'd like to see in the future. I got a few more tutorials coming up on the magic card completion process series, so be on the lookout for some more. Thank you everybody for joining in, and I will see you guys next time on The Process. I'm James Pack. Take care. We'll see you guys.